Hey Chebe, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Aleph of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 61. Today, kind of like the main sugyas are going to be about leaving. Well, we're going to continue talking about how far you can walk into a city when it's in your Tchum Shabbos. We're talking about leaving an ayruv in a city, whether it's populated or abandoned. Cities that are like on dangerous like cliffs and stuff, and then some other interesting politics between cities. So that's what we have in store for us today. Let us begin on Daf Samach Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. So the last thing that we had said yesterday was that Reb Idi bar Avin, Reb Idi had quoted Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that there is a nafkamina when your Tchum Shabbos ends halfway through a city or at the end of the city, right? So let's say if you're in a certain city and you have 2,000 amas to walk in any direction, and there's another city within your 2,000 amas, so if that other city is entirely consumed, entirely fits in to your 2,000 amas, so let's say the city is 500 amas, so it fits entirely into your Tchum Shabbos, well then you can treat that city only as being 4 amas. But if your Tchum will run out somewhere inside of the city, well then you can only go as far as your Tchum allows you to go. So that was Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's opinion. And now Rabbi Idi says about Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's opinion, he says, Ein elu ela divrei nevius. He says, wow, these are words of prophets. I can't explain to you why this makes sense, meaning this is what Rav Idi is saying. He's saying, I won't logically be able to explain to you why Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's opinion makes sense, because Mali kalsu b'chatzi ayir, Mali kalsu b'sof ayir. Logically speaking, why should there be any nafkamina between when my Tchum runs out in the middle of the next city or when the next city is entirely within my Tchum? Meaning, how come when that next city is entirely within my Tchum, it magically shrinks down to 4 amas, and yet when my Tchum runs out in the middle of the city, then we have to, treat the city as it is, right? So let's say the city is only 500 amas wide, and it lies entirely within my Tchum Shabbos, so magically we don't treat that city as 500 amas, we treat it as 4 amas. And yet, if the city was, let's say, 4,000 amas wide, and therefore my Tchum will run out somewhere inside the city, well then the city is just however large it is, your Tchum runs out in the middle, and that's that. And you can't go past wherever your Tchum runs out. So Rabbi Idi wants to argue that logically speaking, there's no reason for this distinction. The only way to understand it is that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi must have had some kind of Masorah from his teachers. That is what Rabbi Idi is saying. To which Rava responds, Amar Rava Tavayu Tanani. Rava says, Rabbi Idi, this isn't such a big chiddush. After all, this is pashit in our Mishnah that we're going to learn on Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. What does it say in the Mishnah? Anshe ir gedola mahalchin as kol ir ketana. That if you have a big city right next to a small city, so the people from the big city can walk wherever they want inside of the small city that's next door. Ve'ein anshe ir ketana mehalchin es kol ir gedola. However, the inverse is not correct, is not true. The people from the small city, if they want to go to the city next door, they would not be able to walk throughout the entire city. They can only walk as far as their Tchum goes. My time, what's the reason? Lav mishum, is it not because Dani kalsu midasim b'chatzi hayir, Vani kalsu midasim b'sof hayir? Is it not that what's going on here is that, well, the big city, the people from the big city can walk wherever they want in the small city, as well as they can even continue past there until their Tchum runs out. Must be because the small city is entirely within the Tchum of the big city, right? The big city, they get 2,000 amas outside of their city. Here's a small city. It's entirely within their Tchum Shabbos. So the small city must be considered like it's Dalet amas, and the big city can walk past the small city and even further. Whereas the people in the small city, they also get 2,000 amas, but the city next door to them is a very large city, and it must be that the large city is larger than 2,000 amas, and their Tchum Shabbos is going to run out in the middle of the city, and therefore they're not going to be able to walk throughout the entire city. They can only go as far as their Tchum allows them to go. So Rav is arguing to Rabbi Idi that this idea of when a city is entirely within the tchum, it's considered like Dalet Amis, and when it's not entirely within the tchum, then we have to just calculate it regularly. That's in our Mishnayos. It's not such a big chiddush. That's what Rav is saying. So Rabbi Idi, Anshe Tani. So Rabbi Idi actually has a different girsa in that Mishnah, as we're going to see. And Rabbi Idi's girsa is actually the girsa that we have, is the text that we have, which is Ein, right? So I'm sorry. Rabbi Idi, Anshe Tani. Rabbi Idi says Anshe, meaning, what does that mean? If we go back to the top, if we go back to what Rava says, what was the Mishnah that Rava quoted? Anshe ir gedola mahalchin is kol ir katana, ve'ein anshe ir katana mahalchin is kol ir gedola. That according to the way that Rava, his text of the Mishnah that we're going to learn at the bottom of Samach Aleph Mud Aleph, his text reads that the people from the big city are allowed to walk throughout the smaller city and past it. But, however, the people from the small city are not allowed to walk in the entire big city. And Rava explains that that's because their ayruv runs out, that their tchum runs out. However, Rabbi Idi has a different girsa in the Mishnah. Rabbi Idi's girsa is that both of them are able to walk throughout the entire city. That, right, anshe, it's not meaning, so Rava has the girsa of anshe ve'ein anshe. Rav Idi has the girsa of anshe and anshe, that both of them are able to do the same thing. That the people from the big city are allowed to walk throughout the entire small city, as well as the people from the small city are also able to walk throughout the entire big city. And how come that is? So Umukimla, and Rav Idi understands that Mishnah is talking about benosein, when a person puts his ayruv in the next city. So according to Rav Idi, that Mishnah that we're going to learn soon is talking about, and as the Mishnah even explains, that it's talking about when the people from one city actually put their ayruv in the next city. So you have the people who live in the big city, and they took an ayruv, and they made an ayruv in the small city, so they can walk anywhere in the small city. And also the people in the small city, they put their ayruv in the big city, and now they're allowed to walk anywhere in the big city. So right, so the people in the small city, they take an ayruv, they put it in the big city, and then they go back home. They sleep at home, but then they walk to the big city the next day, and they could walk throughout the entire big city because that's where their ayruv is. And according to Rabbi Idi, that is what the Mishnah is saying. However, aval moded lo. But in terms of measuring, in terms of, if the people in the small city didn't put their ayruv in the big city, and they have 2,000 amas, or if the people from the big city didn't put their ayruv in the small city, they also have 2,000 amas, and there's no, even the people in the big city, and even though the small city is entirely within the tchum of the people from the big city, makes no difference. The small city is going to just count for whatever it counts for. Right? Avamoded lo tnan. But according to Rav Idi, that Mishnah is not talking at all about moded, about measuring. To say that there's some kind of chiddush, that when the city falls out entirely within the tchum, magically it becomes daled. According to Rav Idi, the Mishnah is not talking about that. And that, according to Rav Idi, is the chiddush of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that we don't know where he gets this idea from, that if the city entirely falls out within the tchum, it just magically becomes like Dalet Amis. That is the chiddush of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rav, of course, argues and says we know that from our Mishnah. Fine. Vilo, but one second. What Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is teaching is not in our Mishnah. What did Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi teach? He taught two things. He taught that when the tchum ends in the middle of the city, so then you only can go as far as your tchum goes. But when the tchum ends at the end of the city, well, then the city is entirely then the city just becomes magically like Dalet Amis. So the Gemara says, one second, that isn't in our Mishnah, even according to Rabbi Idi. But we learned in our Mishnah that the Mishnah says that when somebody is measuring the city, shafilu sof midaso kala b'mayra, that even if his measure ends in the middle of the cave, well, he can't go past his tchum. So according to Rav Idi, the Mishnah is not talking about measuring at all. Right? The Mishnah is talking about putting an ayruv in the city. But one second, the Mishnah itself says that if a person is measuring his tchum Shabbos, and it ends in the middle of a cave, so that's it. He can't go past the 2,000 amas. So the Mishnah is talking about measuring. But the Gemara answers, yeah, but so far it's 3 chalei. No, but the big chiddush, the reason why we need Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is not for when his measure runs out in the middle of the city. The chiddush of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is when when the city is entirely within his tchum, it magically becomes like Daled Amos. According to Rabbi Idi's reading, that's nowhere to be found in the Mishnah, and that is the Chiddush of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Fine. So for it's not in the Mishnah. Omer of Nachman, says of Nachman, Mandatani anshe lo mishtabish, Mandatani ein anshe lo mishtabish. Rav Nachman says, look, everyone wins. Rava's girsa of the fact, that the people from the big city can walk anywhere in the small city, and the people in the small city, however, cannot walk anywhere in the big city. And Rab Idi's girsa, which is that it's talking about the ayruvs, right? If you leave your ayruv in the city, then you can walk throughout the entire city, whether it's the big one or the small one. They're both right. Right? It says of Nachman, Mandatani anshe lo mishtabish, Mandatani ein anshe lo mishtabish, Mandatani anshe lo mishtabish. So Rav Idi, who has the girsa of anshe, that both cities are able to walk entirely in the other city. So he's not making a mistake. The mukim la benose, because Rav Idi says that the Mishnah is talking about when he puts his ayruv in the other city. Umandatani ein anshe lo mishtabish. And Rava, who says ein anshe, so he's also not making a mistake. The mukim la bimoded, because he's talking about measuring. That when you measure and you run out in the middle of the city, so you can only go as far as the ayruv allows you to go. But if you measure and the city falls out entirely in the tchum, in your tchum, so then the whole thing is like Daled Amos. And our Mishnah is missing a few words, and this is how you have to learn it. Anshe ir gedola mahalchan is called ir ketana. So people who live in a big city can walk entirely in the small city. Ve'ein anshe ir ketana mahalchan is called ir gedola. But, however, the people in the small city are unable to walk throughout the entire large city. When is this said? B'moded, when you are measuring. However, somebody who's in a big city, and he put his ayruv in the small city, or the opposite. If somebody was in a small city and he put his ayruv in the big city, well, then you can walk in the entire other city. It's just considered like Daled Amos, and you can continue walking outside of the city until your 2,000 amas run out. Amr of Yosef, says of Yosef, Amr Rami Bar Abba Amr Rav Huna. If you have a city that is on the edge of a cliff, so if there is a wall around the city that is 4 amas tall, well then you can just treat it like a normal city, and you have 2,000 amas outside of the city. Ve'im lav, however, if there's no wall, so you have a city that's like right next to a cliff, and there's like no wall preventing you from falling into the cliff, ein modin la elimi pesach beso, well then we can't treat it as like a normal city, and we're going to have to explain why. But if you have a city sort of in a dangerous place by a cliff, and there is no protective wall, well then we don't treat it like a normal city, and everybody only can walk 2,000 amas from their house, not from the end of where all the houses are. Amr le Abai. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, Daka arba amas amrlan. 1 second. You just said that this daka is 4 amas. Right, amrlan Allah. Ma'ishna mikol dake de alma de arba'a. How come this daka is different than all other dakas which are 4 tefachim? For example, we've seen daka in the content recently. We've seen daka in the context of like if you have a chutzner and a mavui, and you have 3 chutzers in a mavui, and one chutzner doesn't want to participate in the shetufei mavos, so he can just make this like doorway that is 4 tefachim tall, and that signifies that he is sort of separating himself from everybody else, and then they don't have to include him in the shituf. Now, so now over here also we're taking this concept of daka to refer to this wall that you're putting around the city, but we're saying that it's 4 amos and not 4 tefachim. So Abai wants to know how come in general we say 4 tefachim by a daka, but over here we're saying 4 amos. So Amrle, so Rav Yosef says, Hasam lo bi ba'isa tashmishta acha ba'isa tashmishta. The difference is that by like a regular daka, like in a mavui, there's nothing scary about that, right? Whereas over here by this cliff, there's something scary, meaning you need a protective wall so that people feel comfortable leaving their houses and are not scared that they're going to fall off of a cliff. So therefore, it has to be a more significant wall if it's going to be 4 amas. Amr of Yosef Minamina. How do I know that? How do I know this halacha? That when you have a city in a dangerous place, then you need to have a protective wall. And if you don't have a protective wall, well then you can only carry from, you can only walk 2,000 amas from your house, not from the end of the city. So the Tanya is, we learn in the Brisa, Hiter Rebbe, Sheyu b'nei Gader, Yordan l'Chamson. So there were these two cities, Gader and Chamson, okay? And they were on like a mountain, a steep mountain. Now, the people of Gader were higher up, the people of Chamson were lower down. Now, the people of Gader, they had a protective wall under their city, and the people of Gader had a protective wall. The people of Chamson did not build a protective wall by their city. And Rebbe permitted, right? Rebbe permitted, Sheyu b'nei Gader Yordan l'Chamson, that the people of Gader were allowed to go down to Chamson, ve'ein b'nei Chamson Odin l'Gader, but the people of Chamson were not able to go to Gader. How come? My timer. What's the reason why the people of Gader were allowed to go to Chamson, but not the other way around? Lav mishum, is it not because Dani avu daka, bani avu daka? Is it not because, well, the people of Gader made a daka, they made this protective wall, and because they made this protective wall, well, then they can go 2,000 amas from outside of that protective wall. Whereas the people of Chamson didn't make a protective wall, and because they didn't make a protective wall, well, then they can only go 2,000 amas from their house. So I guess it depends where you live in the city. If you live maybe the house that's closest to Gader, so then maybe you can go into Gader. But if you're in the house that's furthest from Gader, well then Mistama, your Tchum Shabbos will run out before you get to Gader, and that's that, because we calculated from your house, since they don't have a protective wall in Chamson, so it's just measured from your doorway, not from the end of the city. Fine. So we see that it was a situation where there was like a danger, there were these cities in a dangerous place, and so the city that had a Gader, a daka, a wall, was able to measure the Tchum Shabbos from the wall, whereas the city that didn't have the wall, they had to just measure from their house, and they get less of a Tchum, because they don't have a whole city that counts as 4 amas. Ki also Rav Dimi, now interesting, when Rav Dimi came, Amar tatroge matatrige luhu b'nei Gader l'bnei Chamson. So Rav Dimi has a very different story, paints a very different picture than Rav Yosef paints. Rav Yosef says, look, it was talking about a mountain, it was dangerous, they didn't put up a wall, so, people in Chamson didn't put up a wall, so therefore, they weren't able to go to Gader because it was too far away. And Rav Dimi says, actually, that the people of Gader would kill the people of Chamson. If the people of Chamson would go to Gader, they would kill them. So, umay hiter, what does it mean that Rebbe permitted the people of Gader to go to Chamson, but not the other way around? Hiskin. It means he made a takana. That Rebbe had to step in and say, look, the people of Gader are allowed to go to Chamson, the people of Chamson are not allowed to go to Gader, because if the people of Chamson go to Gader, the people of Gader are going to kill them. Umay Shabbos. And how come Rebbe Dafka had to say that on Shabbos the people of Chamson shouldn't go to Gader? Because they get drunk. And since they get drunk, they get rowdy. When they get rowdy, they kill people. Oy vavoy. Okay. But the Gemara asks, nami mitatrugelu. But the Gemara says, one second, but why does, just permitting the people of Chamson to go to Gader, why does that solve the problem? If you're still going to allow the people of Gader to go to Chamson, well, they're going to go to Chamson and kill the people in Chamson. So the Gemara answers, Kalba below Masya, Shev Shnin lo Navach. If you have a dog that is not in its regular city, well then even for 7 years it won't bark. Meaning, the dog in its city barks a lot, but in a different place, it's very calm. So here also, the people of Gader, in their city, well, if you're a Chamson dude, you better watch out, because the people of Gader are going to kill you. But when the people go to Chamson, then they're on their best behavior. Well, then Hashtanami Mitatrugei b'nei Chamson l'vnei Gader. Well, if when the people of Gader go to Chamson, they're on their best behavior, well then maybe the people of Chamson will kill them in Chamson. So Kuli Hai Lukaifilu. So the Gemara says, don't get carried away. When the people of Gader go to Chamson, maybe they're on their best behavior, but if even one person in Chamson were so much as to raise a finger in their direction, their killer instincts will come out, and these Chamson people better run. Very nice. Rav Safra Amar Ira Asuya Kikeshes Savoy. Oh, very nice. Who? Let me see a show of hands. Who really liked that sugya of the ear Asuya Kikeshes? Oh, that's very good. Okay, so I have good news. It's back. So, if you have a city that is like a bow. So, right, you have the two ends of the bow that are closer, and then there's the point of the bow that's further. So basically, the way that Rav Safra wants to explain the relationship between Gadar and Chamson is that Chamson was the shape of a bow, okay, and we could still imagine them on the hill. So let's say the bottom of the bow, like the point of the bow, was facing down towards the base of the hill or mountain or whatever, and the open side of the bow was open towards Gadar, above them. Now here's the thing. So the people of Gadar, they made their protective wall, and they can walk, and Chamson, the entire bow of Chamson is within the 2,000 amis of Gadar. So for the people of Gadar, they made a protective wall, so they're allowed to walk 2,000 amas outside of their wall, and Chamson falls out entirely within their 2,000 amas, so they can walk anywhere in Chamson. However, the people of Chamson were in this bow thing, and the bow, the dimensions were off. It was wider than 4,000 amas, it was bigger, it was more than 2,000 amas deep. In that case, they can't measure from the end of the bow. Everyone just has to measure from their house. And for that reason, if you're at the point of the bow, i.e. the furthest part away, so you can maybe get up to the wall of Gadar, but you're not going to be able to get past that. And that's why the people of Gadar can go to Chamson, and the people of Chamson can't go to Gadar because they just can't get far enough in their tchum. Rav Dimi bar Chinana Amar Anshe Ir Gedola Anshe Ir Ketana Havoy. So Rav Dimi bar Chinana says it was very simple that we're talking about a big city and a small city. Gadar was a big city. Chamson was a small city. So the people of Gadar, when they walk 2,000 amas, Chamson is entirely within their 2,000 amas. Whereas the people of Chamson, that was a small city, and Gadar was a big city. So when they would walk into Gadar, Gadar wouldn't fall out entirely in their 2,000 amas, and that's why they weren't allowed to walk there, or at least not throughout the whole city. Rav Kahana Masniachi, that's the way Rav Kahana learns the opinions of Rav Dimi bar Chinana and Rav Safra, i.e. that we know exactly who said what. Whereas Rav Tavyomi Masniachi, Rav Tavyomi says it, Rav Safra, Rav Dimi bar Chinana Chad Amar Ir Asuyir Kekeshes Havai, V'Chad Amar Anshe Ir Ketana V'Anshe Ir Gedola Havai. Meaning, so whereas Rav Kahana said that Rav Safra was the one who says the Keshes, and Rav Dimi bar Chinana says that it was Ir Gedola and Ir Ketana. The way that Rav Tavyomi learns it is, look, we know that it's Rav Safra and Rav Dimi bar Chinana, but we don't know who says which opinion. Very, very beautiful. Says the Mishnah, Anshe Ir Gedola Mahalchin Es Kol Ir Ketana. So the people from the big city can walk throughout the entire small city and past it. That seems to be the assumption that it's also past it, because the small city is like a Dalet Amas. V'Anshe Ir Ketana Mahalchin Es Kol Ir Gedola. And the inverse is also true, that the people from the small city are able to walk in the entire large city. Ketzad, how is this? Mishaya be'ir gedola. So if you have somebody who was in a big city, v'nasan es ayruvo be'ir ketana, but he put his ayruv in the small city, be'ir ketana v'nasan es ayruvo be'ir gedola, or if he lives in the small city and he put his ayruv in the big city. Well, since he put his ayruv in the city, so the entire city is like Daled Amis, and he can walk past that until his tchum runs out. Rabbi Akiva Omer, however, Ein lo ela b'makom ayruvo al payim amo. Rabbi Akiva disagrees, and he says that no, if you live in one city and put your ayruv in a different city, you can only walk 2,000 amas from your ayruv. You can't treat the entire city like 2,000 amas. Like Dalet Amas. Amrulem Rabbi Kiva. Now Rabbi Kiva says to the Chacham, Yatem don't you admit to me, B'nosen Eruvo b'ma'ara, that if you put your Eruv in a cave, She'en lo ela mimakom Eruvo alpayim ama, that from the place where you place your Eruv, you only have 2,000 amas, and not that the entire cave is considered like Dalet Amas? Amrulo, they said to him, Masai, Bizman she'ein bad yurin. That would only be if there's, nobody living in the cave. Well then we agree, if you put your Eruv in the cave, you only have 2,000 amas from the food. Aval, yesh bad yurin, if people live in this cave, So then you'll be able to walk throughout the entire cave and also outside of it 2,000 amos. So we see that actually the inside of it is more makil than the outside of it, than the top of it, because the inside of it, if there are people living there, then the entire thing can be like Dalet amos. Whereas on top, on top of the cave, so then, if you put your ayruv there, you won't have you'll just have 2,000 amos from wherever your ayruv is. And when we talk about measuring a tchum, that if his measure, if his 2,000 amos falls out in the middle of the cave, well, he can't walk past where his measure falls out, and that is diat. Zokt the Gemara. Amar Rav Amar Shmuel says, Rav in the name of Shmuel Shavas Be'ir Chareva. Okay, interesting. So, up until now, we've been talking about just regular cities where people live in. So the Chacham said, if you put your ayruv in a regular city, so then the whole city is like Dalet amos. Rabbi Akiva disagreed, fine. Here we're talking about a city that nobody lives in. So interestingly, so it has walls and everything, but it's abandoned. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Shavas Be'ir Chareva. So if a person mamash spent Shabbos in an abandoned city, l'Rabbanan Mahalech Eskula v'chutz la'apayim ama, he would nonetheless be able to, the whole thing would be like Dalet amos, even though it's abandoned. However, if he left his ayruv, he didn't spend Shabbos there, he just puts, a can of tuna fish there in, and so then, in that case, we don't treat the entire city like Dalet amos. Just from the place where he left his city, he has 2,000 amos in any direction. From the place where he left his ayruv, his food, then he has 2,000 amos in any direction. Rabbi Elazar Omer. So Rabbi Elazar argues, Rabbi Elazar ben Pidas, who we learned the other day, right? Be'avosa tishke tamid, that out of love of Torah you should make yourself nuts, and he would be studying in the Shuk Tachton Shel Tveria, and his turban would be, or Shel Tzipori, and his turban would be in the Shuk Elyon Shel Tzipori. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Pidas. Anyway, so he says, Rabbi Elazar Omer, Echad Shabbos ve'echad hiniach, ma'alech eskula v'chutz la'apayim ama. So Rabbi Elazar says that it doesn't make a difference whether you spend Shabbos there or whether you just put a can of tuna fish there. You will be able to walk throughout this entire abandoned city. It'll just be like Dalet amos, and you can continue walking outside of it until your 2,000 amos run out. Meisvei. We have a kasha against Rabbi Elazar. What's the kasha? Amar loim Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to the Chachamim, Iyatim modimli, don't you admit to me, benosin esayruva b'mayra, that if you put your ayruv in a cave, she'ein lo mimakom ayruvo el alpayim ama, that you only have from where you left your tuna fish 2,000 amos. Amrlo e masai, they said, well, it depends. Bisman she'ein badiurin. So yeah, if nobody lives in the cave, so then we agree with you that you'll only have 2,000 amos from your tuna fish, and we don't treat the entire cave like Dalet amos. No, so abe'ein badiurin module. So we see that the Chachamim admit to Rabbi Akiva, that they agree with Rabbi Akiva, that when nobody lives in this cave, well then you only have 2,000 amos from where you put your ayruv. So here also, if you have this abandoned city, so then if you just put your food over there and make an ayruv over there, we won't consider the entire city like Dalet amos. Rather, you'll have 2,000 amos from where you put your food. So, Rabbi Elazar, why are you saying that when you put your ayruv in the city, the whole thing is like Dalet amos? So, my ein badiurin ein re'uya l'dira. So, Rabbi Elazar says, when the Chachamim say that when the cave doesn't have diurin, so then you only have 2,000 amos from where you leave your ayruv. So that's talking about when it's uninhabitable, right? Meaning that there were walls and the walls fell down. It's like it's completely just unable to be lived in. So in that case, yeah, you only have 2,000 amos from where you put your food. However, the city that we're talking about, people don't live there anymore, but the walls are still there. And therefore, as long as you, in that case, Rabbi Elazar is going to argue, if you put your food over there, so then you would still have the entire city be like Dalet Amos. So just a regular city that nobody lives in anymore, according to Belazar, if you put your food there, make an ayruv, you'll have the entire city like Dalet Amos. A cave that like there's no walls or anything, so then there's like no walls surrounding it, so then yeah, it would just be 2,000 amos from where you put your food. Tashma coming here. Shavas be'ir, okay. So if somebody spends Shabbos in a city, afilu hi gedola ka'antuchya, even if it is as large as Antochia, b'ma'ara afilu kima'aras tzidkiyahu melech Yehuda, or if he spends Shabbos in a cave, even if it's as large, or even if it's like the cave of Tzidkiyahu melech Yehuda, ma'alech eskula v'chutz la'apayim ama, you can walk throughout the entire cave or throughout this entire big city, and we just treat it like Dalet Amos, and you can go outside of it as well, 2,000 Amos. Katani, what do we see? Ir dumya dima'ara. So we teach a city that is similar to a cave. Ma'ara chareva, afir chareva. So just like a me'ara, a cave is desolate, nobody lives there. So it must be that we're also talking about a city that nobody lives in. Vishavas in, avaleniach lo. And we're dafka saying that if he spends Shabbos there, then we treat it like Dalet Amos. But if you would leave his ayruv, then we wouldn't treat the whole thing like Dalet Amos. You would just have 2,000 Amos from where you put your ayruv. So we're saying that this brisa is saying that in a city that is abandoned, that nobody lives in, if you spend Shabbos there, so then the whole thing is like Dalet Amos. But if you just put your ayruv there, so then you only have 2,000 Amos from where you put your food. So Mani, who's the author of this brisa? Ilem Rabbi Akiva, if we say that it's Rabbi Akiva, well, my area chareva afidu yeshiva nami. What's the big deal about the fact that it's a destroyed city? Right? According to Rabbi Akiva, even in a normal city, right? In our Mishnah, we were talking about leaving an ayruv in a regular city, and Rabbi Akiva said you only have 2,000 amos from your ayruv. So why do I need Rabbi Akiva to tell me that when you have a destroyed city, then you only have 2,000 amos from your ayruv, and we don't say that the whole thing is like Dalet Amos, Elulav Rabbanan. It must be that it's the rabbis. And the time of the Shabbos, the reason why we treat this city that's chareva, that's destroyed, the reason why we treat it like Dalet Amos is because he spent Shabbos there. Aval hiniach lo. But if you just leave his ayruv, then we wouldn't treat the whole thing like Dalet Amos. You would only, rather, you would have 2,000 Amos from where the food is. So the Gemara says, Lo tema ir dumya dima'ara, right, that Rabbi Elazar can argue and still say that in general, in a destroyed city, the whole thing would be like Dalet Amos if you leave an ayruv there. The way to understand this brisa is that we have it wrong. Don't say that we're talking about a city that is like a cave and we're talking about a city that is destroyed. No way. Say the other way around. We're talking about a cave that is similar to a city. Ma'ir yeshiva av me'ara yeshiva. Just like a city is inhabited, we're also talking about a cave that is inhabited. Rabbi Akiva, and this is dafka the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the Amar ein la mimakom yeruvo ela apayim ama. Right, and that Rabbi Akiva had said in our Mishnah that in a regular city, an inhabited city, that when you put your ayruv somewhere, you only have 2,000 amos from your ayruv. We don't view it as the entire city is Dalet Amos. Uvishavas modeh. However, if he would mamash spend Shabbos there, then even Rabbi Akiva agrees that the whole city would be like Dalet Amos. How can you say that we're talking about a city that is inhabited, and it's like, and we're also talking about a cave that's inhabited, but it says K'maris Tzidkiyahu, talking about the cave of Tzidkiyahu, and Tzidkiyahu's cave was not inhabited. So K'maris Tzidkiyahu v'lo K'maris Tzidkiyahu. It was like the cave of Tzidkiyahu, but it also wasn't like the cave of Tzidkiyahu. K'maris Tzidkiyahu, it was like the cave of Tzidkiyahu Gedola, in that it was large. But v'lo K'maris Tzidkiyahu dilo asam chareva v'acha yeshiva. But it's not like the cave of Tzidkiyahu, because Tzidkiyahu's cave was destroyed, and we're talking about what was, empty, uninhabited, and we're talking about a cave that was inhabited. Okay. Mar Yehuda ashkochinu livnei Mavrachasa. So Mar Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda, but Mar Yehuda found the people of Mavrachasa, the kamosvei eruvayu, that they would put their eruv in the next city, bevei knishta devei agubar in the shul of Agubar. Amrulu, and Mar Yehuda told them, hey, gavu batfei, put it as deep into the shul as you can, kiechi delishdu lechu tfei, so you can get more bang for your buck and you can walk further into the city, because the further you put your ayruv, the further, wherever you put your ayruv, you get 2,000 amas. We're not going to treat when you put your ayruv somewhere, you're not going to treat the whole city like Dalet amas. Rather, you only have 2,000 amas from your ayruv, and therefore put it as far as you can so you can get the biggest bang for your buck. So Amalei Rava, so Rava said to Mar Yehuda, Palga, he said, hey, what are you doing over here, you nudnik? Be'eruvin lays the chashla lahala Rabbi Akiva. When it comes to Ayruvin, nobody is machmir for Rabbi Akiva's opinion. When it comes to Ayruvin, the halacha is always like the makel opinion when it comes to Ayruvin. The halacha is always like the lenient opinion when it comes to Ayruvin. Clearly, Rabbi Akiva is the more strict opinion over here, the more stringent opinion over here. He's saying that wherever you put your ayruv, you only have 2,000 amos from wherever you put your ayruv, unlike the Chachamim who say that as long as you put your ayruv in the city, the whole city is like Dalet amas. Right, and therefore Rava says, Nudnik, Mar Yehuda, what are you doing? Why are you telling them put it further into the city so that they can walk more? As long as they leave it in the city, the whole city is like Dalet amas. Nobody's choshish for the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Hadron alach Ketzad Ma'avrin, and that is we've completed Ketzad Ma'avrin. We'll come back to Ketzad Ma'avrin, and we will start with the next parak tomorrow. That was Daf Samach Aleph of Masechta Ayruvin. So we talked today about leaving an ayruv in a populated city. So in that case, the rabbis say if you leave your ayruv in a populated city, well then the entire city will be like Dalet amas. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, you only have 2,000 amas from where you put your food. In an abandoned city, well, if you spend Shabbos there, well then it'll be fine. If you spend Shabbos there, then you can the entire city will be like Dalet amas. But if you leave your ayruv there, but you don't actually spend Shabbos there, so Shmuel says that you only have 2,000 amas from where you leave your ayruv, and Rabbi Lazar says that you have the entire city is like Dalet amas. We also talked about a city that's like on a cliff. So Rav Yosef said that you have to put a fence over there, a protective fence, and if you don't put a protective fence, then you only have 2,000 amas from your house, not from the end of the city. And then he tried to prove it from Rebbe, that Rebbe said that you have these two cities of Gadar and Chamson. He said that the people of Gadar can go to Chamson, but not the other way around. And Rav Yosef wanted to say it's because the people of Gadar made a protective fence, but the people of Chamson lower down on the mountain did not. And therefore, they only had 2,000 amas from their door. And then we had another interesting opinion. Whose opinion was that? That was the opinion of Rav Dimi, who said that actually what was going on with Chamson and Gadar was that Gadar, they would kill the people in Chamson. So therefore Rabbi had to say that the people of Gadar can go to Chamson, but not the other way around, because if the people of Chamson went to Gadar, they would mamish kill them. Then we saw the opinions of Rav Safra and Rav Dimi Bar Chinana, which was that one opinion was that the reason why the people of Gadar can go to Chamson was because they made this fence so they can, and Chamson was entirely within 2,000 amas of Gadar. However, Chamson was the shape of a bow, and since they did not make a fence, so you can only go from where your house, from the door of your house, 2,000 amas, and the people further away on the bow, well, they wouldn't be able to actually go into Gadar. And the final opinion was that we're talking about a large city and a small city, that Gadar was a large city, Chamson was a small city. So the people of Gadar can walk throughout Chamson, the people of Chamson were unable to walk throughout Gadar because their air would run out. That was Daf 61. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.